Welcome to our Hoop Club box summer 2024. We are making our daisy punch needle coasters. This is the tutorial. It's going to be in multiple parts because this needs lots of introduction and I really need to show you lots of different parts of this project so that you can complete it. So don't just read the instructions, do watch these video tutorials and watch me do this so that you can then do it. I really want you to love punch needle and I really want you to get the hang of it, and so watching is really important. So this is the first part and I'm going to go through all of the golden rules of punch needle. So there are some things that will make your project successful and they are just things you need to bear in mind as you're doing the whole project. So if it's not working, you're finding something's not happening right, then just check back to these golden rules and just check that all of these are kind of in place and that you've checked each of these golden rules to make sure that that's not the problem. Everything you need is in the box, but one thing I am recommending people get is a glue gun, as it's going to make the last part of the project much easier for you when you stick down the back side edges of your daisy coaster. You don't have to have one, but it will make your life a lot easier. And this is a super grip hoop. This is what you've got in your box, and this is different to a normal embroidery hoop. It's designed to have a different kind of inside here, and this grips the fabric much better. So one of the key things about having a successful punch needle project is getting your fabric really tight in your hoops. So we've tested the amount of fabric we've put in your box so that you can actually get 6 squares of fabric. So you could potentially make 6 coasters. What you're going to do is fold the fabric in half lengthways, and then you want to make sure that when you've got your hoop laid on top of that fabric, that you're cutting a square where you've got a really decent amount of border to be able to pull the fabric tight in the hoop. If you leave too little, if you try and get cut it like that to try and get more fabric and be a bit more thrifty with the fabric, you're not going to be able to pull this tight enough as you need to get the fabric tight in the hoop. It's really important that the fabric is tight. So we're looking at round about this kind of length square, and when you do that you do actually get 6 pieces of fabric. So you will end up with 6 pieces of fabric, roughly 26 by 27 centimeters. 2 of the bits of fabric that you cut may be slightly smaller than this, so let's use those as practice squares for you to practice your stitching on to start with. But these bigger squares, we folded the fabric in half and we're going to just then cut it down the middle so that we've got 4 pieces of fabric, about 26 by 27 centimeters, and we will then draw our template onto these fabric. So the template is in your instructions, and we are just going to take one of our pieces of fabric and lay it over the top, place it centrally, and then get your pencil, make sure it is central because you want an equal amount of fabric either side of that. And then we're just going to draw on the design with pencil. I mean, you could use a pen, you could use a biro, because this is all going to get covered up. So we unscrew the hoop so that it's loose and we can get the larger one over the smaller one. Put the smaller one underneath, lay your fabric over the top, and then keeping that flower central, we're going to put the bigger hoop on top. And then to start with, we're going to screw the screw back in. And this is actually quite a good hoop for not having to use a pair of pliers or a screwdriver. What you need to do when you don't tighten it fully, you're going to need to tug your fabric around the edges of the hoop to get it as tight as you can. Just keep feeling it, and you're getting to the point now where that sounds really nice and tight, but we still want to keep going. You want it so tight. So what you can do, as you can see, there's a little fitting there for a little screwdriver. you can get a screwdriver and really tighten that, but I'm managing to do it with my hands and I'm happy with how tight that feels. But you may need to keep tightening as your project goes on. It might become a little bit looser, so you might need to just go back and tighten once you've started. Keep checking it basically. Now we're ready to thread our needle. We're starting with the gold thread because we're going to do the centre of the daisies first. This is your needle, and to thread it we're going to start by taking the needle threader, which is this thin folded over bit of wire with a little white tab on the end, and that simply gets pushed up through the needle. So you see it come out of the top, and then you're going to take your gold thread, put that through the needle threader, just a little tag like that, and then pull it back through. So that's the first part of threading your needle. You've then got to get the thread through the eye of the needle here, and you can either do that, if you're good at threading needles, you can give your thread a little lick and then push it through. Or if you struggle more with threading needles, you can put the needle thread that you used through the eye of the needle. Again, put your thread through that loop and then pull it back. So that's 2 ways of threading your needle. And then just trim. It used to be 5 centimetres or so long. So that's your needle threaded. You want to check, this is how you change the size of your needle. So the longer the needle, the longer the loops you're going to be punching will be. If you want them really flat, you need the needle short. We are going to be going at around 6 to 7. So you can see the chart of numbers here on your needle, and you just twist to go longer clockwise and twist anti-clockwise to make it shorter. So I have got my needle there, that is in between 6 and 7. So we've got the 2.2mm needle in our punch. I can't remember whether I had to change this to get the right size needle, because the pack does come with a few size needles. So I'm going to do a revision to this video when I have, because they haven't arrived yet, the needles. So I can't check. So first golden rule, or second golden rule, the first was keeping your fabric really tight. Second is you need to keep your wool really loose. And what I mean by that is the process of punch needling is how, the way it happens and the way you form your loops is that this fabric grips the loop of wool once you've pushed it through. And if you have this end of your wool tugging at that and kind of going in the opposite direction, trying to untug the loop that you've just made, then you are going to struggle and your loops won't stay. So this needs to be, your supply of wool always needs to be loose so that it is not pulling back against your loops. So a good idea is to chuck it over the side of the table or the side of the sofa so it's kind of on the floor and it's just free to unroll. But that is one thing to keep checking. If you're struggling to get nice long loops, check that your wool supply isn't tight and isn't being hindered by kind of being caught around something or something like that. And then when we actually get to punching, so the way we're going to start is we punch our needle through. We're going to start on this centre bit of the daisy, so it can be at any point around the edge of this daisy. We're pushing our needle through, and the first thing we do is pull that loose thread through, and then take your needle back out. Now, you are always going to be dragging your needle away from the wall, the direction of the wall. So see, the wall is being fed through that eye of the needle. You always want to be dragging your needle away from the wall. So I'll show you here. I'm going to do my first punch. I'm going to drag the needle away from that wall. So you can see that I am, as I pull the needle up, I'm making sure it goes fully back down to the base of the punch needle, and then I'm not lifting it out of the fabric. I'm just dragging the sharp end of the needle to the next point I want to punch. So I'm not lifting it right out, I'm just pulling it out so I can feel the end of the needle, then I'm dragging and going back down. So take your time with this, go slowly. What you're aiming for are about 4 stitches to every centimetre. That's the kind of perfect size. Too small, too close together and they will bunch up and get a bit messy. Too far apart and you will have gaps on the other side. I'm doing this in the air because I'm showing you, but when you're doing it, I think the best position is to kind of be leaning on a table like this, so that you've got something to kind of push back with on the hoop. So practice that technique and drag your needle around. The good thing about this fabric is that it's pretty forgiving. If you look and see that you've got kind of big gaps somewhere, see I've got a little gap here where that stitch has gone a bit shorter, you can unpick it. You don't want to do this too many times because the fabric is not endlessly forgiving, but it is forgiving to the point that if you feel like you want to do those stitches again, you can pull it out and try it again. Now, I would keep turning your piece over to just check that you're happy with your stitches, because the smaller amount that you unpick, the better, if that makes sense. So now that I've seen this stitch here is not great, I've got to unpick all of that to get back to that stitch. Whereas if I checked and turned it over and looked when I was at this point, I would have only had to unpick that amount. And I am sure you will have to do that at the start of your punch needle journey, because there is just a knack. I don't know, it's the angle that you hold it at, but there is a knack to getting these stitches the length that you want them to stay through the fabric and consistently long. And as you go round, you will get better at it. But just keep going like this, dragging the needle 4 stitches per centimetre, roughly. And just checking that you're happy that your stitches have all come through and they're not too short and there's no big gaps. Now I've got to the end of my section, so that's all nicely full of stitches. So I'm going to leave my needle through. I'm going to pull a bigger loop of that thread out of your needle, pull a bigger loop, and then just trim that off and take your needle through. And so what you're left with are this kind of starting thread and a finishing thread that you can then just trim off. And at this point you can also, if you've got any longer loops that have kind of gone a bit rogue, you can also trim those off as well. So that's the centre part of my daisy, the start of my needling, and we're going to show you now that you do exactly the same thing around the petals. So we're going to be punching a border and then filling it in with our stitches, but with the cream beige thread. So before I start on the petals, I have gone in and I've tightened my fabric again because I just want it to be really as tight as possible when I'm punching. And I'm now going to thread my needle with the different colour. You need to imagine that this is the cream, because I have come to the studio to do this tutorial and forgotten the colour wall that I needed. So mine are going to be pale yellow, yours are going to be cream. In exactly the same way that we did with the centre of the daisy. It doesn't matter where you start, I'm going to start here. I'm going to push my needle through and then pull the loose end of the thread through. And then I'm going to start to stitch around the edge of my daisy shape. Keeping my loose wool, keeping my supply of wool loose, not caught around anything, not pulling the needle out of the fabric, I'm just dragging it along. Making sure my fabric is always tight. Making sure I'm always going down to the base of the needle, so I'm taking it slow if I need to make sure that's happening. And I'm checking my stitches are coming through regularly so that I can unpick any that I need to. So I'm just going to show you actually that you can unpick them here. So at the start I can see that some of these stitches have not come through as long as I want them to, so I'm going to pull my thread through, snip that off, and pull out that first lot of stitches. I'm going to give the fabric a bit of a massage to get it to go back, so that when I then re-punch over that, we're going to be totally fine. So I'm starting again, pulling that thread through, and my stitches look good, so I'm going to carry on. So I've got one stitch that hasn't fully gone through here, but I've noticed it quickly. So I'm just going to, I'm not even going to unthread my needle, I'm just going to pull those stitches out and pull the thread tight again so that I can do those stitches again. And we're just following the pencil line. Remember that this is the back of our work. The side we're punching into is the back and this is the front. So these, the loopy side is going to be the side of our coaster. So again, I've finished my punching. I'm going to pull the thread through from the needle to create a little loop that I can then trim off. I'm going to trim off my ends, and that's one petal done. Now, I have suggested keeping your needle length the same for the middle and the edge of the daisies. If you wanted to experiment with a shorter loop, which gives a slightly different look, then you could use this first coaster as a bit of an experiment and a practice, and you could go a bit shorter on the next one. So if I pull mine out to between, I've got it on 5 there, so it just means the needle's going to be shorter. so the loops are going to be a little bit shorter. So I've shown you this with a 6-7 length needle because I found that to be the kind of most easy to learn on. You might find your stitches kind of not sticking as well in the fabric as the needle length shortens, but feel free to have an experiment and maybe do one petal in a different length with your needle. So I have finished this daisy and I have used it as a bit of an experiment to go round and do different length stitches. So these are my bigger stitches where I've got the punch needle set at 6, 7, and then I've gone gradually kind of down around here. And you get to this one, and this is where I've got it set at like 3 to 4. So you do get quite a different look with the different length of the needle. So this is Dugo's original sample, and hers is a really short length needle here to get that kind of look. This is the one that I've done with a longer needle, so it gives it a kind of a more fluffy rug feel. Also the fact that Dugo is a complete punch needle professional and I am definitely still learning, but that kind of shows you the different kind of looks that you can get. So I'm going to leave this video here. So we've got to the stage where we've punched out our daisies and we're getting used to using the needle and getting consistent stitches, and I will go on to how we finish the daisy and turn it into a coaster in the second video.